So I want to welcome you all here. I'm Karen Kukil, Associate Curator of Special Collections. Can you hear me? Okay. I always forget to say who I am, so I have a reminder here. It's just been really wonderful to collaborate with the Poetry Center on this reading, and Ellen Doré Watson and Jen Blackburn wanted me to mention the next upcoming celebration next Tuesday. Smith's Favorite Poem Project will be in this room April 24th at 7:30. So we have a lineup of extraordinary readers reading their favorite poem, including our president, Jane Yolen, and many others. What?
Not Donald Trump.
Oh. And I guess you're giving away things too, right? Free poetry books, and this is, the poster says, Ellen's last hurrah, because you all know she's retiring and we've just loved working with her. But at least you're here for 2 years as a Conkling professor, which is great. So welcome to the 5th annual Enid Mark Lecture on Poetry and Contemporary Book Arts. It's a series begun in 2014 to honor Enid Mark, class of 1954 at Smith College, and her work at the Elm Press. The Mortimer Rare Bookroom collection of special collections and the Poetry Center are particularly excited to bring Diane Ackerman to campus this year, since she was one of Enid Mark's favorite poets. 3 of Mark's fine press books are on display in the lobby upstairs, and they include some of Ackerman's poems printed letterpress, bound by local binders, and extra illustrated with Mark's own lithographs. They celebrate the marriage of exquisite poetry and the book arts, for which our Pioneer Valley is well known. And I notice a lot of book artists in the audience. Poet, essayist, and naturalist Diane Ackerman received an MA, MFA, and PhD from Cornell University. Poet Maxine Kumin was one of the first reviewers to comment on Ackerman's brilliant mind, on display throughout her poetry and prose. Ackerman's work of nonfiction include The Human Age on the Natural World and Human Ingenuity, which won the 2015 Penn New England Henry David Thoreau Prize. 100 Names for Love tells the story of Ackerman's work to bring her husband back from the depths of aphasia after he suffered a terrible stroke. Other works of nonfiction include An Alchemy of Mind, of Poetics of the Brain, based on the latest neuroscience. A natural history of her garden is the subject of Cultivating Delight. Deep Play considers play, creativity, and our need for transcendence. I love that. A Slender Thread is about her work as a crisis line counselor. You've written on everything under the sun. The Rarest of the Rare and The Moon by Whale Light explore the plight of endangered animals. On Extended Wings is a memoir of flying. The bestseller, A Natural History of the Senses, is a poetic and scientific tour through the kingdom of the senses. And The Zookeeper's Wife is a narrative nonfiction about one of the most successful hideouts of World War II in Warsaw, Poland, a tale of people, animals, and subversive acts of compassion, which was made into a full-length feature film starring Jessica Chastain last year. I hope Diane will delight us with a few snippets from these works, since her prose is as gorgeous and inspirational as her poetry. Her poetry has been published in leading literary journals and spans a wide spectrum of topics. Poems of psychoanalysis and fire are featured in Origami Bridges, a book hot off the heart. One of the poems in this book is entitled, "The work of the poet is to name what is holy." Artist Enid Mark particularly admired her earlier book, Jaguar of Sweet Laughter, new and selected poems that burst off the prescribed limits of the page, according to the Hudson Review, in the same way great paintings burst their frames. Many of these poems, documenting landscapes from Amazonia to Antarctica, are featured in the Elm Press publications on display. There is even a poem about one of Smith's distinguished alumni poets, Sylvia Plath. Diane Ackerman will talk about her creative process as she reads from some of these extraordinary publications. Yesterday, Diane Ackerman received the Jan Karski Humanitarian Award at the Polish Embassy in New York City. On April 28th, Ackerman will participate in the Universe in Verse special program in Brooklyn, celebrating science-inspired environmental poems about the earth. Diane Ackerman has been honored as a literary lion by the New York Public Library and has received many prizes and awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, the John Burroughs Nature Award, the Orion Book Award, and the Lavin Poetry Prize. And I just love this. She also has the rare distinction of having a molecule named after her, the Diane Ackerman. Please join me in welcoming Diane Ackerman to the podium.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I guess since she's introduced the molecule, I had better explain that it is a sex pheromone in crocodiles. How, you wonder, did that happen? Well, I spent about 10 years traveling around the world and working with endangered animals and writing about them rhapsodically for The New Yorker. And it was a great gig. I loved doing that. And on one of these, I had to sex alligators. Yes, all I can tell you is that you can't tell what gender they are from the outside. You have to lasso your gator, drag the gator out of the water, climb on top, hold the eyes down because they have pop-up eyes. And if you hold the eyes down, then they get a little bit dizzy and they won't try to get rid of you. And then you, you climb on board, yes, and do an internal, and then you know immediately if it's a male or female gator. And there were a couple of chemists who thought it was sporting of me to be willing to do this. But I do think it's really fun. No, not the sexing of alligators. Having the molecule. The sexing of alligators, you know, when you climb off, if they thwack you, it's like being hit with a baseball bat made of bone. And I was just bruised all up one side. Yeah. But it was worth it. I am so pleased to be here, especially because this is a lecture series, a reading series that honors Enid Mark, who was such an astoundingly gifted woman. She was a magnificent artist, and I adore that she loved both the inner and the outer beauty of books. Particularly these days when so many books are being read online. I love the bookishness of books and how beautiful they can be made. And hats off to her. I thought I'd start with a poem that I wrote for children. It's called School Prayer. A couple of years ago, George magazine decided that it really was starting to look like prayer was going to be brought back into the schools. Congress was very actively in favor of it. So they got in touch with a number of poets and fiction writers, and they asked us to write school prayers. And I thought, well, I don't want children to feel obliged to worship in someone else's religion or to worship a god at all if they don't want to. But I don't want them to go without spirituality and feel that they have to sacrifice that if they sacrifice the other or if they're not in favor of the other. And so I tried to write a school prayer that would cover that kind of earthly spirituality. In the name of the daybreak and the eyelids of morning and the wayfaring moon and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, as a healer of misery, as a messenger of wonder, as an architect of peace. In the name of the sun and its mirrors and the day that embraces it, and the cloud veils drawn over it, and the uttermost night, and the male and the female and the plants bursting with seed, and the crowning seasons of the firefly and the apple, I will honor all life, wherever and in whatever form it may dwell, on earth my home and in the mansions of the stars. I was very pleased that Enid included the Sylvia Plath poem in her work. I came upon an edition of Sylvia's Faust, Goethe's Faust, when I was in the Penn State Rare Books room. The curator just said, "Look what I have for you." I said, it's just a standard edition of Goethe's Faust. He said, "Oh, not that standard. Look inside." And I was absolutely amazed to see how she had gone through, underlined various things that were emotionally really meaningful to her, and also improved the language, improved the translation over and over and over. It was just wonderful. On looking into Sylvia Plath's copy of Goethe's Faust, you underlined the jugglery of flame with ink sinewy and black as an ocelot. Pensive about ash, you ran to detail. You ran the mad sweet shop of the soul, keen for Faust's appetite, not Helen's beauty. No stranger to scalpel or garden, you collected bees, knew how to cook, dressed simply, and undressed the flesh in word mirrors. Armed and dangerous with the nightstick of desire, you became the doll of insight we knew, to whom nearly all lady poets write, a morbid Santa Claus who could die on cue. You had the gift of rage and a savage wistfulness. You wanted life to derange you, to sample its real muscle. You wanted to be a word on the lips of the abyss. You wanted to unlock the weather system in your cells, and one day you did. I never loved the pain you wore as a shroud, but your keen naturalist eye, avid and roaming, your nomad curiosity, and the cautionless ease with which your mind slid into the soft flesh of an idea. I thought you found serenity in the plunge of a hot image into cool words. I thought you took the pledge that sunlight makes to living things and could be startled to joy by the green epaulets of a lily. But you were your own demonology, balancing terror's knife on one finger until you numbed and the edge fell free. I have a wonderful garden in Ithaca. It's not in bloom yet, as yours, I could see it starting to be, and in New York City really is in bloom. And I have a lot of lady's mantle growing in the garden, so of course I needed to find out a little bit about the mythology and the medicinal properties of lady's mantle. And that's what this poem is called. Its pleated green cape collects dew in the morning, when the sun night ambles into view with blinding armor and the bossy wren fences off his kingdom in rippling song. Herbalists have trusted it to stop bleeding or vomiting, heal wounds, and strangers still, contract most anything. End dysentery, firm breasts, ease the long bursts of menstruation, even restore virginity. Contract far enough, and the universe disappears up its own wazoo, into the Big Bang. Contract a life, and the pure recedes into the unborn, then beyond to the precipice between nowhere and now here. Now here, a magic land of Lady's Mantle and Wren's adagios, and pain, of course, and loss, and monsters, and decay, but no less alchemical for that, no less a magic cape pleated with days. I was very lucky at Cornell as a grad student in writing to have on my committee a poet and an astronomer. So I had A.R. Ammons, if you know his work, as the chairman of the committee, the poet, and Carl Sagan as the astronomer. Carl had a lot of interest in the arts, and between the two of them, they ran interference for me, which was just great, and I could do interdisciplinary work. I had a hard time persuading most of the people in the English department that this was an okay thing for me to be doing, and on one occasion, I won't mention his name, one of the very well-known scholars took me aside. He really was being avuncular, he meant well, and he said, "What's a nice girl like you doing writing about amino acids?" I said, "Well, you know, I take the universe literally as one verse, and I'm interested in all of it," but I don't think I persuaded him. It was really great, though, to be able, because of those two committee people, to just study whatever I wanted to, and take things like physics for poets, a wonderful course. You don't need math to do it. Anyway, Carl asked if I would write an old-fashioned love poem, which of course poets love to do, but this one, he asked, could it be to an extraterrestrial? Ode to the Alien. Beast, I've known you in all love's countries, in a baby's face, knotted like walnut meat, in the crippled obligato of a polio-stricken friend, in my father's eyes, pouchy as two marsupials, in the grisly radiance of a winter sunset, in my lover's arm veined like the Blue Ridge Mountains. To me, you are beautiful until proven ugly. Anyway, I'm no cosmic royalty either. I descended from countless rapes and invasions of cell upon cell upon cell. I crawled out of slime. I swung through the jungles of Madagascar. I drew wildebeest on the caves at Lascaux. I lived a grim life hunting peccary and maize in some godforsaken mudhole in the veldt. I may squeal from the pointy terror of a wasp or shun the breezy rhetoric of a fire, but whatever your form, gait, or healing, you are no beast to me. I, who am less than a heart flutter from the brute, I who have been beastly so long. Like me, you are that pool of quicksilver in the mist, fluid, shimmery, fleeing, called life. And life full of pratfall and poise, life where a bit of frost one morning can turn barbed wire into a string of stars. Life aromatic with red-hot pizzazz, drumming ha-cha-cha through every blurt, nub, sag, pang, twitch, war, bloom of it. Life is unlikely as a pelican or a thunderclap. Life's our tour of duty on our far-flung planets, our cage, our dole, our reverie. Have you arts? Do waves dash over your brain like tide along a rocky coast? Does your moon slide into the night's back pocket, just full when it begins to wane? Does all joy seem interim? Even if your blood is quarried, I pray you well and hope my prayer your tonic. I sit at my desk now like a tiny proprietor, a cottage industry in every cell. Diversity is my middle name. My blood runs laps. I doubt yours does, but we share an abstract fever called thought, a common swelter of a sun. So, beast, pause a moment. You are welcome here. I am life, and life loves life. Well, as it turned out, Carl died very young. He had a genetic disease that he didn't know about, and it was a shock to everyone who knew him. I felt the loss enormously because we knew each other over a long period of time at Cornell and had become good friends. And so I wrote this poem afterwards called We Die. We die despite appointments and feuds, when our toddler, who recently learned to say no, opens and shuts drawers 100 times a day, and our teen braces for the rapids of romance. We die despite the contracts and business trips we planned, when our desk is untidy, despite a long list of things to do, which we keep simmering like a pot of rich broth. We die despite work we cherish, marrying whom we love, piling up a star-spangled fortune, basking on the Riviera of fame, and achieving that human participle with no known object. Life is not fair, the old saw goes. We know, but the saw glides slow, one faint rasp, and then at length another. When you died, I felt its jagged teeth rip. Small heart wounds opened and bled, closing as new ones opened ahead. Horror welled, not from the how, but the when. You died at the top of your career, happy, blessed by love, still young. Playing by evolution's rules, you won. Prospered, bred, rose in your tribe, did what the parent gods and society prized. And yet it didn't save you, love or dough. Even when it happens slow, it happens fast, and then there's no tomorrow. Time topples, the castle of cards collapses, thoughts melt, the subscription lapses. What a waste of life we spend in asking, in wish and worry and want and sorrow. A tall man, you lie low, now and forever complete. Your brilliant star eclipsed. I remember our meeting so many gab fests ago at a crossroads of moment and mind. Lost friend, you taught me lessons I long to learn, and this final one I've learned against my will. The one spoken in silence, warning us to love hard and deep. Clutch dear ones tighter, ransom each day. The horror lesson I saw out of the corner of my eye, but refused to believe until now. We die. You know, I still get chills when I read that. This is one of the wonderful parts about giving a reading, and it's also one of the intense parts that you relive, the emotions that went into writing the poems. My oldest and closest girlfriend, Ava Sobel, whom some of you may know, was here as a visiting professor last year. And she spent some time in a sleep lab. She was working for the New York Times, and they volunteered her, I think was the polite way to put it, to spend a week of free running in a sleep lab where there were no clocks, there were no windows, no newspapers, no contact with the outside. They wanted to see, if left alone, if isolated, how many hours that would the cycle, the circadian rhythm, end up being. And I think maybe in her case it was 25 instead of 24, something like that. But it was quite an ordeal in many ways. And she claims that when she got out, she conceived my beloved goddaughter Zoe almost instantaneously. which is possible, I think. And this is a little birthday poem that I wrote for her. Her name is Zoe. Ultimate immigrant who passed through the Ellis Island of your mother's hips, with a name slit loose from its dialect of cell and bone, welcome to the citadel of our lives. We listened for the hoof prints, for the hoofbeats, your heart for 9 months, and then your mother nearly died hospitably to give you light. Like an Hawaiian princess, you are carried everywhere, on a litter, in a carriage by the arabesque of one's arm. Your feet have never touched ground. You who can't even roll over when you want, creamy little tyrant, control the lives of all around you. Sound leaps from your face and your ribs quake each time the downy world chafes. Last week you first smiled because grown-ups acted silly. Things elude you, but you can grasp absurdity already. By mistake you suck your wrist instead of mother's nipple. We laugh. With your operatic cries and Michelin man pudge and seepages from below and eyes alert as twin deer, you have no sense of self whatever. Zoe Klein, goddaughter with a hybrid name, living in the soft new crook of your mother's arm, with a face like a Dalai Lama's or a small Neanderthal's. Born out of a dream by two, you live a dream by halves now, slumberous, milky breathed. In time, love will answer questions you didn't raise. A belled marvel, the cat of your inquiry, will stalk through a world brighter and more plural than you guess, where a baby's fingerprints, loopy weather systems, one for each tip, will leave you spellbound that matter could come to this. It's sometimes been hard for me to choose between writing something in poetry or in prose. And this has especially been true when I've traveled to startling landscapes. So when I was in the Amazon, I wrote about it in prose for one of my books. And then I also wrote some poems that are set in the Amazon. And here's one called Beija-Flor. Beija-Flor is the Portuguese for hummingbird. It means flower kisser. And this is just a poem about a kiss. But all of the imagery in it is Amazonian imagery. When you kiss me, moths flutter in my mouth. When you kiss me, leaf-cutter ants lift up their small burdens and carry them along corridors of scent. When you kiss me, caimans slither down wet banks in moonlight, jaws yawning open, eyes bright red lasers. When you kiss me, my tiny fist conceals the bleached skull of a sloth. When you kiss me, the waters wed in my ribs. Dark and pale rivers exchange their potions. When you kiss me, my heart surfacing steals a small breath like a pink river dolphin. When you kiss me, the rain falls thick as rubber. Sunset pours molasses down my spine, and in my hips the green wings of the jungle flutter. When you kiss me, blooms explode like landmines in trees loud with monkey muttering and the casuistry of birds. When you kiss me, a palm cradling the moon in its arms becomes a pictograph for leisure. When you kiss me, my flesh sambas like an iguana. When you kiss me, eyes glitter in the foliage, ships pass like traveling miracle plays, and coca sets brush fires in my veins. When you kiss me, the river tilts its wet thighs around a bend. When you kiss me, my tongue unfolds its wings and flies through the shadows as a leaf-nosed bat, a ventriloquist of the twilight shore, which hurls its voice against the tender world and aches to hear its echo rushing back. When you kiss me, Anthuria send up small telescopes, the vine-clad trees wear pantaloons. A reasonably evitable moon rises among a signature of clouds. and the sky fills with the pandemonium of swamp monkeys. When you kiss me, time's caravan pauses to sip from the rich tropic of the heart, find shade in the oasis of a touch, and bathe in nature carnal, mute, and radiant. You find me there trembling and overawed, for when you kiss me, I become the all you love, a peddler on your luminous river whose salted fish are words, daughter of a dolphin. When you kiss me, I smell of night-blooming orchids. When you kiss me, my mouth softens into scarlet feathers. An ibis with curved bill and small dark smile. When you kiss me, jaguars lope through my knees. When you kiss me, my lips quiver like bronze violets. Oh, when you kiss me. You know, you'd think this would manage to hold together the relationship, just presenting this poem. You'd think that would work, but it just didn't, unfortunately. Try as I did. How many of you have read The Zookeeper's Wife or have seen the film? Quite a few of you. Okay, I'm going to read a little piece of Zookeeper. The piece I read is a bit violent, but for those of you who haven't read the book, I'll just tell you that it all ends very happily. It was a true story that I was lucky enough to come upon about two zookeepers at the Warsaw Zoo in World War II who were Catholic and could very easily have survived the war. They did not need to risk their lives and the lives of their children to help Jews and members of the underground escape from the ghetto. But they were so disgusted by Nazi racism that they felt they had to. It was the only right thing to do. And they spent the whole war doing that, took enormous chances, but in particular, the zookeeper's wife, Antonina Shavinska, did. She never held a gun. Her heroism was compassionate heroism. Her weapon of choice was kindness. And that's not a kind of heroism that we celebrate as often as we should, I think. And so I ended up writing this book. But here is a little passage about what was absolutely the last straw for them. Nazi bombers attacked Warsaw in 1,150 sorties, devastating the zoo, which happened to lie near anti-aircraft guns. On that clear day, the sky broke open and whistling fire hurtled down. Cages exploded, moats rained upward, iron bars squealed as they wrenched apart. Wooden buildings collapsed, sucked down by heat. Glass and metal shards, mutilated skin, feathers, hooves, and scales indiscriminately as wounded zebras ran, ribboned with blood. Terrified howler monkeys and orangutans dashed caterwauling into the trees and bushes. Snakes slithered loose, and crocodiles pushed onto their toes and trotted at speed. Okay, so now you know from what I told you earlier how I knew that crocodiles run that way, because I had seen them earlier. And, yeah. Bullets ripped open the aviary nets, and parrots spiraled upward like Aztec gods and plummeted straight down. Other tropicals hid in the shrubs and trees and tried to fly with singed wings. Some animals, hiding in their cages and basins, became engulfed by rolling waves of flame. Two giraffes lay dead on the ground, legs twisted, shockingly horizontal. The clotted air hurt to breathe, and it stank of burning wood, straw, and flesh. Echoing around the zoo, the tumult surely sounded like 10,000 furies scratching up from hell to unhinge the world. Running from one cage to the next, Antonina worried about the animals and her husband fighting at the front. If even innocent animals aren't safe, what hope had he? And when he returned, what would he find? Miraculously, some animals survived at the zoo. Many escaped across the bridge and entered Old Town while the Capitol burned. People brave enough to stand by their windows or unlucky enough to be outside watched a biblical hallucination unfolding as the zoo emptied into Warsaw's streets. Seals waddled along the banks of the Vistula River. Camels and llamas wandered down alleyways, hooves skidding on cobblestone. Ostriches and antelope trotted beside foxes and wolves. Anteaters called out, "Hachi, hachi," as they scuttled over bricks. Locals saw blurs of fur and hide bolting past factories and apartment houses and racing out into the outlying fields of oats, buckwheat, and flax. Antonina wrote of stopping a young soldier near the villa and asking, "Have you seen a large badger?" Badger was one of their household pets. He said, "Some badger banged and scratched on the villa door for a long time, but when we didn't let it in, it disappeared through the bushes." Poor badger, she lamented, as she pictured the family pet's frightened appeals at the door. After a moment, "I hope he managed to escape," clouded her mind. The heat and smoke resumed. Her legs returned, and she ran to check on the bristle-maned horses from Mongolia. The other horses and donkeys, including her son's pony, lay dead in the streets, but somehow the very rare Przewalski horses trembled still upright in their pasture. As I say, they managed to save the lives of almost everyone who hid with them, all but two. The two people died of illness. So 300 people somehow managed to live with them. They hid them in the bombed out cages where the zoo animals had been. And they gave them the names of whatever animal had been there so that they could then give their young son a bowl of soup and a piece of bread and say, "Maybe the lions need to be fed, or why don't you see if the bears would like something?" And nobody would be the wiser, even their cook. I don't know how they managed this, but she said after the war that she didn't know anything about it. 300 people, some of them hiding between the walls in the villa itself and in the basement. She said that they just got incredibly hungry as the war progressed, and she had to keep cooking more and more and more. Yeah. Here is a little piece of prose from a book of mine called Dawn Light, and it is simply about biking around Otsego Lake at dawn with a girlfriend of mine, and it is all one sentence. So it's a sentence of about 1,000 words with semicolons and other punctuation and stuff like that. So I'll try to pause in ways that'll make it followable. When the deep purple falls. This is also one of those examples of things I couldn't decide if I wanted it to be poetry or prose. And so I also set it out as a poem in one of the books. In the lavender hours after daybreak, before the sun leapt into the blue stage of the sky to begin its light opera of soul-searing heat, we set out on our bikes to circumnavigate Otsego Lake, which, encircled by dense forest, lay flat as pounded metal, thickly gray-purple with a light mist rising, yet wavering clear like an ancient mirror, the light the Indians named Glimmerglass, and pedaled hard up a long, steep incline as the temperature of our bodies and the day rose together, and within the aubergine drapery of the forest, twigs crackled, a confetti of light fell through the leaves, small, quick beings darted among the tree trunks, and an occasional loud crunch or scuffling led our eyes back 1,000,000 years through several tunnels of instinct To violet shadows we automatically interrogated for bear or mountain lion or highwayman or warrior, as a mixed chorus of insects and birds sang out, oblivious to our cycles, but mystified perhaps by our talk and laughter, or by the sight of a woman with blonde hair riding a teal bike, wearing black shorts with purple chevrons, the exact color of a mallard duck's underfeathers, and behind her the same thing, but different, a woman with black hair riding a purple bike, both following a road dusted with loose gravel spread in winters past and weaving along undulating mountains. While shadows staggered like eighth notes through the woods, the lake grew calm as cold wax, but the sun purpled and swelled, and sweat began to seep from our faces, so we drank long gulps of clear, warm water from bottles, not the lake water deepening to black orchid whenever a castle-sized cloud drifted over, not the mirage of water shivering on baked macadam up ahead, not the salt water plumping up our cells that gives us shape and flow and spirits the mind through soul journeys, but water captured at a spring in Vermont that we had never seen, water filtered by rocks as we are filtered by the sights we see, especially the majestic indigo of the lake, the lavender air, and the night purple convalescing in the forest, as we pedaled into the open where rich growing fields surrender to the sky their perfectly ordered rows of corn, with leaves like iron green collars and tassels shaking glitter in the uproaring sun. Sights we sometimes savored with little comment and a few delicate sips of mind, and yet at other times we wolfed down whole vistas. But we both knew the tonic value of the journey that fell somewhere between pleasure and hardship, though we are not the sort of people who picnic on pain or calibrate fun, but we reveled in working ourselves through the landscape, which we discovered tree by tree, farm mile by farm mile, with chicory and Queen Anne's lace bunching in the culverts, pedaling hard, though we were steeped in pure exhaustion, pure exhilaration, leading us through those hinterlands where all emotional battles meet and become one tenderness. Knowing that far away, behind us in the village of Cooperstown, shops would soon be lifting their awnings, museum doors yawning wide, and the great ladle of enterprise slowly stirring, as the sun rose high and the town thrummed with a million colorful intrigues. But we were panting and pushing and pedaling and steadily pulling the day up behind us, changing gears for once as sunballs of blinding neon raced over the lake and we biked towards noon, not thinking of future showers or rest or the grilled orange roughies served on a lakeside veranda where we might later stare in amazement at the lake we'd circled, stretching bright as a spill of mercury under the steadfast sun. But instead, we were happily lost in a long serenade of mauve water and the what will be somewhere around the bend. Well, I think I'm going to end with a little something about becoming an owl. This also appears in Dawn Light. I was going to read something from Natural History of the Senses about kissing, and it's kind of a hard call here, kissing owl, but I think it will be the owl. I like becoming other animals. I like the experience of folding up myself as if it were a sweater that had just grown a little too warm on a summer day and putting it on the ground beside me and, in my imagination anyway, insinuating myself into the perceptions of another animal and trying to understand what the world would look like from their perspective. Now, I'd like to encourage you to do this with me. You don't have to actually stand, but if you want to, put your wings out at any point, and you want to do the kind of neck stretching that takes place during the, well, you'll see. Please feel free. Be the owl. I would be an owl if I could. A creature named after its sound. So I would be a howl if I could. Sweet cheat of the night, who slices open the air with soft serrated wings, so silently it doesn't warn dozy prey. How far can an owl see? An owl could read the bottom line on an eye chart from a mile off, or hear a mouse stepping on a twig 75 feet away. Tuning and retuning, I would be an owl with ears twin radar dishes, eyes winged binoculars. A screech owl, because though baby screechers do screech, the adults make the most enchanting, soft, whinnying howl. Owl of the stethoscope ears. I think maybe, though, we need to have a room full of owls. So how about if you do the owl with me? It goes, ooh, and on three, right? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that was great. That was seriously great. Since this is being filmed, it will really sound like a whole room full of owls, which is great. I'd swallow meals whole, head first, tumbling soft and furry down my throat to the fiery plant that compacts all the inedibles into a hard pellet, and then twice a day, growing bloated and queasy, I'd stretch my neck up and forward, squeeze my stomach hard, and vomit a hairy, bony nugget. Oh, I'd vomit gently, all things considered. I wouldn't thrash and shake the pellet free for 5 minutes like other inversely constipated owls. I'd eagerly coax these dainty pukes. And that is, by the way, the technical term, the scientific term. It's called owl puke. Not like the giant sea cucumber that hurls up its whole stomach and tosses it literally at the missing feet of a wall-eyed fish, and then, while the distracted fish feast, steals away, a gutless wonder, but alive, soon to grow another stomach. No, I'd sing of owl puke, the pellets that pave my days with dense nuggets that offer home to fungi, beetles, and other tramps. Does it sound nicer if I were to call it a fur ball? Well, I suppose so. But a little cat fur swallowed while grooming really can't compare to a stony, wadded up girdle of rodent, shrew, mole, gecko, and snake skeleton, mixed with beetle crackle and songbird wings and oily fur, as if for a jigsaw puzzle of a chimera, part mammal, part bird, part reptile, part insect, all tasty. Yes, all things considered, I would be an owl with a ukulele call, a cowl of gray feathers cupping my feathered jowls, talons sharp and strong as ice hooks, parachute wings, a demi-suit of down and ingenue eyes, voodoo eyes. I would be possessed of the ultimate head swivel, upside down and around, back and front, over again, over the other shoulder, hunting among oaks and cottonwoods and old shady maples, with broad wings outstretched and head tucked in tight, I'd flap hard and fast, rarely gliding or hovering, while listening and watching for scuffling prey in the leaf litter and the lawns. I'd sing duets with my mate during the day and be calmed by a male chorus at night, a parliament of owls. What a panoply of songs and calls. When frightened, I'd blend in with tree trunk or foliage, stretching my frame long, closing my eyes to slits, tightening my feathers, and standing still as old bark, In winter, I'd gobble hot meals of warm-blooded prey, and in summer, cool, crisp lizards, snakes, and bugs. And it goes without saying that I would marry for life, a long life of a score or two, lengthened by living in the suburbs and devouring the rat race. I would be an owl with wide feather skirts to curtsy with when courted by bowing suitors. Oh, the formal dances of courtship, ceremonial and piquantly oriental. First, a springtime male calls, robust as all get out, and I reply. We flirt like this several times. Then I see him flying in, watch him perch nearby, and begin head bobbing and bowing deeply, repeatedly, now and then winking one eye. If I ignore him, he just chases harder. Accept, and the bill kissing and mutual preening begins, with the preened one uttering soft whimperings of delight. Both fine feathered friends, amused and enthused. Yes, all things considered, I would be an owl, with owl-bright eyes, creatured comforts, and wide wings with down fur below to wrap my chicks in owl love. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to stay here, and I'll take questions in just a moment.
So I want to introduce Enid and Jean Mark's son, Peter Mark, who wants to give Diane a present from the Mark family.
Hopefully you'll appreciate it. This is something from my father.
Thank you.
He can't be here today, unfortunately. He's
Oh, how beautiful.
It's a little bit slipping, but
How very beautiful.
I really appreciate your coming and really enjoyed your talk.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. And I am delighted to be here. And I send a big hug and fond regards to your father as well.
Thank you very much.
You'll be happy to know that the front, of Nielsen Library is on the 1909 building is on the front of this medal, not the wings.
Yes, so I think they have places, mics, where they could come up and ask questions. Oh, let's find out. You may have to speak very close. Testing? Okay. Great. Does anyone have questions? Do you think you could speak into the mic right there? I think you'll need to put your lips very close to it.
I'm very familiar, and I thank you very much. And listening to you speak just now in regard to animal connection, I don't believe I ever quite read somewhere. Have you ever engaged in healing journey with shamanism? Do you connect with animal totem in that fashion too?
So the question, if you didn't hear, is because of my great love of animals, have I ever been on a shamanistic journey? Do I have animal totems and connect with animals in that way? My late husband had all kinds of animal names for me, and they were very totemic in different ways. I mean, I was a one-woman zoo for a while there. And on other occasions, for whatever reason I don't understand, I would suddenly declare the entire household to consist of wombats or kangaroos or some other creature. So animals, becoming animals, identifying with animals, making animal sounds and so on, very close to my heart. But the great joy, I've never done shamanistic travel and never really had totems in that way. But the great joy of about 10 years of my life was in being able to sign on to expeditions so that I could actually be in the water with whales while they were singing next to a mother whale who, by the way, was no farther away from me than these chairs are, and she was just sculling. This huge, tons heavy whale who could have killed a human so easily was not at all feeling violent about us. She was just sculling to do the same thing that we were doing, which was look with great curiosity at this other life form. And she had an eye very much like a human eye. And we just looked at each other for a very long time. She had a baby. The baby was as big as an elephant, but it was clearly a baby. And didn't have the same experience. And the baby came up and turned and looked at me with one eye. And then as if it needed to make sure of what it was seeing, it turned the other eye around and looked at me with the other eye. And then finally, when this was off Patagonia, where there is a whale camp, because the right whales, mothers, feed their babies on the way to Antarctica, where the rich feeding grounds are, in a certain bay. So that's where the whale camp is. And for a while there, they were doing DNA studies by collecting the skin that the whales shed. The whales get sunburned, just like we do. And then they shed their skin in the water, and they could do DNA studies. Now they're using drones that fly low over the whales when they spout, and they collect DNA like that. But we actually were able to get in the water with them. And when the waters were fiercely cold, when we finally had to get out and we swam towards shore, we kind of waved at them, you know, because it was inevitable. You felt the need to do that. And to our great amazement, the mother did one of those wave things back. They do, it's one of their movements, but what are the odds? You know, it was extraordinary. So I spent really intimate time with wonderful, wonderful animals. I went with the Washington Zoo on one occasion to turn loose golden lion tamarins in the Amazon, and that was a great experience. I have a couple of books of those animal adventures. One is called The Moon by Whale Light, and the other is called The Rarest of the Rare. Any other questions? If not, I may have to ask you, you know, about dissociation of sensibility among 17th century metaphysical poets or something. So, just giving you a warning here. Sometimes people wish to know.
I would just like to say that I'm totally awestruck by your magnificent use of language, prose poetry, but your experiences, how you've just enveloped them and twisted them and brought them all together. Such a magnificent way.
Thank you so much. It's, you know, I started out as a poet. I still feel that the source of my creativity is as a poet. I end up writing more prose these days than anything else because I support myself as a writer. But I have a strong sense of sneaking poetic books past people by providing enough information about some of the marvel that surrounds us every day that I manage to get it past editors sometimes. And sometimes I have to fight pretty hard to do that too. The language that we use is so beautiful, it's so rich, it is exquisite, but it's also a rut, you know, it's a palatial rut. But it can't begin to cover all of our experiences as humans, since language is human-made and our experiences, our emotions aren't. So for me, trying to get at the experience of being alive is something that I can only do if I combine words in imagistic ways so that they will cover some of that empty space. And metaphors and similes really do that. Imagery really does that, at least for me. So I've continued to do that in my prose also. I think we've got first and then you.
I have been wishing that my 12-year-old granddaughter were here because she connects very strongly with the natural world, particularly with birds, and would have loved your owl. But I'm wondering about your development. Obviously, there's a kind of empathy and a connection that extends way beyond, I think, what most of us experience. But I'm wondering about when you became aware of this in yourself. At what age, or how that process was for you?
I started writing poems when I was very, very little. I had a very difficult, we now fashionably call it dysfunctional childhood, but it was a very traumatic childhood. And one of the things that happens in a situation like that, which is part of why I identified so strongly with Antonina Zhubinska, whose parents were murdered in the early days of the Russian Revolution, so she grew up as an orphan. One of the things that happens sometimes to kids that don't have constant parental connections is that they make a connection with nature. Nature becomes the supportive mother. And then they adopt people, this is what I did, over the years who really want to parent them and are great in that way. And I bonded with nature very, very early on and was always outside up to my shoulder inside of a tree or something. So there was partly that, and then also I had a very rich fantasy life in which from an early age on, I imagined myself part of an itinerant group of extraterrestrial poets. And the way this worked is that the poets traveled around the universe, or around at least the galaxy, and each one would be born into the life of whatever the most intelligent life form was on the planet, and have to be creating art from that perspective, which would then be contributed to the library. Can you imagine what that library was like? Of the thoughts and feelings and so on. And then, but of course the poet in question wouldn't know. It's just that at a certain point, they would find out, not want to leave, of course, probably not want to leave, but nonetheless, go up to the mothership, go on to the next place, and be born again into the life of another creature. Okay, so let's just say that fantasy didn't stop when I was little. It really carried on for a long time. And the idea of being a poet who looks at the spectacle of life and is trying to leave a document of what it felt like and hurt like and tasted like and thrilled like, and what the experience of being human was like on this particular planet, descended upon me at a very early age as something that I wanted to do. It was not something that I could tell my friends. They already thought I was strange. And it was before it was really popular in schools for teachers to find it acceptable if you colored trees other colors than green and things like that. I didn't know that I belonged to a community of people that we called artists, and that they are very much a continuum, but they exist across time and space, not necessarily all in one place. I had to find that out later.
Actually, you answered my question. I wondered about your childhood.
Oh, she was asking about my childhood. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing to say something about your experience as a synesthesic in imagining into other animal forms and other spaces.
So he's asking about synesthesia, and I don't have it to the extent that some people do. Nabokov famously had a lot of synesthesia in really wonderful ways, but there's no doubt I will taste something and it will have a color, or I will see something and it will remind me of butterscotch, something like that. It doesn't happen instantaneously. So that's why I say that it's not a kind of synesthesia where it just automatically takes me over in a kind of savant way. I've known people like that. In my case, it happens very subtly, and it will happen if I concentrate on it also. But it's just something that has always been part of my life. The everythingness of everything somehow reminds me of the everythingness of everything else. Darwin had a term for this, panmixis, and it's just always been that way. So I have a very bad memory. If you ask me about a conversation I had last week, I won't be able to tell you the details of the conversation, which is unfortunate because I'm writing a novel at the moment, and it would be ever so useful if I could remember conversations. But what I do have a good memory for is that if I see something, I will get a kind of film in my mind of everything that it reminds me of. And I think you see that you can see that in the imagery of the poems, where I will see something and it will, I'll see leaves in the fall being picked up by the wind going across the street, and it will look like penguins or something like that. That's normal.
I know there are a lot of writers and artists in the audience, so I wonder if you could sketch out some of your creative practice, and are there particular times that you write, particular people that you work with? Are there patterns for how projects take shape?
Well, the best advice, really, that I could give a writer, I think, is to follow your curiosity. Don't worry about being successful. And it's hard to avoid worrying about that these days because there is so much limelight. And you walk through the airports and there are all these books that are on display and so on. But I think you need to just follow your curiosity and your passion. Because if you do that, probably you will be successful if you can convert what really deeply fascinates you into words. But even if you can't, you will have lived an interesting life and a fulfilling life. So that's number one. Number two is I read constantly. I read everything. I love language. And it's always better, I find, to have more possibilities than fewer possibilities. And so the more acquaintance with how other people have written things, with how words sound together, how they feel speaking them together, the better. And also, for me at least, but I think for a lot of writers, it helps to have a routine. So if I'm working on a book actively, every day at the same time, I will sit in the same place and work on it. It may not be that I'll be inspired every day, but I do know that if I don't do that, I'm not going to be there when the inspiration hits. I need to somehow tone down everything that is circling around. And I've known a lot of other writers who have felt that way too, that it helps to do that. Also, I don't ask myself to write more than, and now you can fill in the blank, per day. If you were a student of mine, I would say, don't ask yourself to write more than a paragraph a day. Just really put your heart and soul into it. The truth is, you're probably going to write more than that. In my case, I don't require that I write more than a page a day. You know, at the end of the year, you have a book. And you can should all over yourself. You know, I should have done this, I should have done that, and so on. And that's not helpful at all. It's better just to give yourself over to it. I find that it helps to become completely, royally obsessed. And almost everyone, every writer I know, is obsessive in this way. The useful application of obsession is invaluable. Unfortunately, if you can summon the useful application of obsession, probably you can obsess uselessly too, because minds are like that. But what happens is that when I'm working on a book, almost everything that takes place somehow is magnetized to the purpose of the book. Your senses are always alert and receptive for anything that is going to contribute in some way. It's a different self-state. It's a different frame of mind. Everything is seen through the lens of what it is you're working on. I don't know what it's like to live with somebody who's like that, if you are not like that, but it seems to be one of the best ways, just to give yourself heart and soul over to it. But if you have other specific questions about writing, I'm happy to answer those too. Oh, one more thing. Every day that I work, I start by, I start by trying to read through everything I've written up until that point, or at least part of it, so that I get back into the scape, the mindscape of wherever the book is. I've known people who have used pieces of music for that, and that works really well. And they'll just play the same piece of music, the same song, whatever, over and over and over while they're working on a book, because for some reason it's like an emotional bookmark, and it holds the place so that it's just easier to slide into it emotionally. For a while, the book that I'm working on now, I was listening to Villa-Lobos's music that he wrote in Brazil. I'm not doing that at the moment. Now I'm listening to jazz by the Alex Skolnick Trio. I don't know why. It emotionally captures something about where I'm focusing. But a lot of people do that. And so in the process, if you're constantly reading it over and over, you're revising relentlessly. And I do that. And especially, I try to revise the verbs, because life is process. And so much of being able to understand what is happening to someone and to identify with them when you're reading something happens in the verbs. You know, you can say that somebody walks across the street, but you have no idea how. The minute you start really describing, you know, if I say that he is crossing the street as if you were inventing walking for the first time, or as if it were a series of recovered falls, or whatever it is, you would start then to be able to picture it better. So I'm very attentive to the verbs also. And there's one question in the back.
Thank you. I have a question about...
Could you hold it close to your face?
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
A question about strangeness.
Strangeness.
Yes, yeah. I'm just... It seems that when I was young, I got to take...
Closer?
When I... Can we... Is this...
That's better.
Okay. I took a seminar, a poetry seminar, and I felt like it really changed my life in major ways, and I always felt I was incredibly lucky for this. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I realized poetry is sort of this strange thing that a lot of people don't actually enjoy or grasp or want to pay much attention to. And I'm wondering, in your science mind, what the, I have thought about this in many different ways, and I'm curious how you think about it. What is the, I don't even want to say purpose because there's the miraculousness of everythingness, but what do you think this thing about strangeness accomplishes in the, in the DNA of life?
Well, you're calling it strangeness. I would say that most of what I do is just pay attention. But we tend not to pay attention to the details around us, or, we'd never be able to deal with the UPS person or whatever, or make lunch. We tend not to. There's a good reason why we are creatures of habit. Habit really allows us to slur over all of the details of what you went through when you were learning how to do that to begin with. That's its purpose. It does it beautifully. If you had to think about doing the Krebs cycle, you wouldn't be able to. It's good to have habits. Unfortunately, the minute you start being masterful at something, you lose all of the innocence and the wonder that brought you to it to begin with, or you lose a lot of it. And I certainly found that when I was learning to fly airplanes, that in the beginning, it was terrifying, but it was also so complex that you pay attention to every little thing. And then after a while, you start going on autopilot. And we spend a lot of our lives on autopilot, and you miss things. So poetry has this enormous capacity for making things that are too familiar seem strange. Strange enough that you will begin to appreciate them anew, as you might have when you were a kid. And things that are strange seem more familiar. Suddenly, you can relate them more to you. Here's an example out of film. How many people have seen The Shape of Water? Yeah, a lot of people. I love that movie. And certainly it's pretty strange. There is a beast in there who's strange, but it's put in the context of a relationship and love that we can all identify with in different ways. It gets domesticated in a sense. So whether it's working one way or the other, poetry has this great capacity to do things like that. And maybe that's why it's so much the soul of a people, and why it is becoming more popular these days with all of the social and political turmoil that we're going through. Well, I want to thank you very much. I know there are books out there to sign, and if you just want to come up and say hello, please do that too. Thank you.